Hello and welcome to Foreign Policy Focus. This is episode 97 and I am the show's host, Kyle. On today's show, I'm going to be catching up from news on last weekend, over the weekend. Of course, it's been a relatively busy weekend, lots of threats between the United States and North Korea, and we're getting to some pretty serious escalation on that situation. That's where I'm going to start today's show. If you're interested in sharing the show or just, want to comment or whatever, you can find the show at several places, but the easiest places to find it are at foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com or at thelibertarianinstitute.org. The show has its own tab on the right side of the page there, right underneath Scott Horton Show. So the North Korea thing, of course, has been going on for a long time. I mean, years and years and years. There's been an issue going back with the United States and North Korea. In fact, the war that was fought between the United States and North Korea, kind of right at the beginning, the Cold War, was never agreed to an end, and there's only an armistice, kind of a permanent ceasefire going on, or a temporary ceasefire going on between the United States, China, and North Korea and South Korea. I'm not sure if South Korea is actually a signatory to the deal. There's one state that's kind of an odd outlier there. Either way, we, go down the road and we have an agreed framework, and up until 2003, I believe North Korea is actually a member of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which means they have a safeguarded nuclear energy program where I believe they were given certain information about nuclear energy in exchange for IAEA scientists constantly be poking around in North Korea, making sure North Korea doesn't develop nuclear bombs. In 1994, the North Koreans agreed to a deal with the Clinton administration where North Korea would give up and have additional inspections. I believe at the end of it, they were planning on giving up their entire nuclear energy program, giving up their missile program. In exchange, they would get concessions and aid relief from the United States. But the deal was in place and was holding to some extent. And when the United States took over, George W. Bush, who, his administration wasn't living up to the promises in the agreed framework to North Korea, decided to withdraw from the agreed framework deal. And North Korea then withdrew from the Non-Proliferation Treaty and went on to set out to make nuclear weapons. North Korea conducted the first nuclear weapons test in 2006 and moved forward to today, where just last month they had their first apparent hydrogen bomb test, or at least a nuclear test with some additional materials to make a very large explosion. Right at the beginning of the Trump administration, we have this incident where the North Koreans are supposed to have kind of their initial kickoff of talks with the Trump administration. And what happens, and I pretty distinctly remember this because it's right at the start of the podcast that I'm doing here, we have the assassination of Kim Jong-un's brother. And it does seem that the Kim Jong-un administration did have his brother killed with some sort of weird substance in Malaysia. However, there are contending theories on that, and I don't know well enough to conclusively condemn Kim Jong-un or not. And it does seem to be that, if Kim Jong-un was worried about shoring up his administration, taking out your father's only other son, it is a good move to do that in the government you have in North Korea. So we don't have the talks between the United States and North Korea. The United States canceled the talks because of the assassination of Kim Jong-un's brother. I believe it was Nikki Haley was one of the parties that, made the announcement about ending the talks. And I was, disappointed off the top. At that time, I thought, well, how bad could Nikki Haley be? But she immediately goes, so we're not talking to you. Pretty quickly after this meeting is canceled, we get the big war games between the United States and South Korea. Had the war games not been right away, maybe tensions could have settled from the assassination of Kim Jong-un's brother. I mean, it wasn't that big of a story in the United States at all. It never has been. Nobody really knows who this guy is anyways. Most Americans, if any, could find Malaysia on a map. And so, it's a thing that happened, and I guess the North Koreans shouldn't have done it, but nobody really cared. And I think this story could have kind of blown over, but the war game starting up was a real problem. I think a couple times a year, the United States holds pretty big war games with South Korea, and North Korea gets really upset every time. There's a couple reasons why North Korea gets so upset. I think the first is just that the United States is, simulating an invasion of North Korea, and the North Koreans feel like the United States is getting better at it, and this is all this artillery and weaponry on their border. And if the Americans were ever to actually go through with an invasion of North Korea, well, they would have to have all these troops and weaponry on the border. And when it just made sense that the United States would take advantage of a war game scenario to do this. Now, the media will never, ever talk about this issue from the Koreans' perspective, but recently we had these large Russian war games in Russia and Belarus. Essentially, what happens is every 4 years, the Russians and the Belarus government conduct these Zapad, I believe they're called ZAPAD war games. And it's Russia's based set of war games. Hysteria leading up to this, saying that the Russians would have a combined total of 100,000 troops participating in these war games, and that the United States was somehow seriously worried that the Russians were going to invade northern Poland and were putting tank brigades in Poland, Estonia, and Latvia. And you had all this, hype that Russia was just going to go in and just steal the state of Belarus, and all these things were going to happen because, they had these big war games. And so America has all these reactions, but the media never, says, well, why is America putting tank brigades in northern Poland because Russia's carrying out war games? That doesn't make any sense. But when Kim Jong-un carries out a missile test in response to the United States carrying out war games in South Korea, then you don't have a single time where nobody will ever say, well, isn't that missile test in response to the North Koreans being scared that the United States is going to steal North Korea in the middle of the night with these war games? And so that was a little bit of a tangent, but I just really want to highlight that because that's something I recently picked up on with the Russian war games, is just how much differently American war games are treated than enemy war games. And so the other reason the war games really upset the Kim Jong-un administration is I think the Kim Jong-un administration kind of has to play up to that point, and they probably take advantage of it. If the North Koreans are really doing kind of scientific research, and that's what you have to do to develop these weapons, and I'm not saying that it's good scientific research. I'm not happy that North Korea has nuclear weapons. But if you're the North Koreans and your people are starving and you're sinking a whole bunch of money into nuclear weapons, well, the enemies having war games on your border is a great time to give you internal political cover to carry out all these missile tests and stuff. So long as tensions are high, the people are going to be willing to flush as much money down the tubes as they need to defeat the enemy. I mean, just look at the Americans, how much money we're going to waste, like $1 trillion next year on the military, and nobody even cares. In fact, that it's an unacceptable criticism to even say that we spend too much money on the military. And the more popular opinion is, well, we spend more if we could. And so I think the Kim Jong-un administration probably takes advantage of these war games and then the political cover they create to allow him to just waste a whole bunch of money on hydrogen bombs and ballistic missiles when they're never going to do a single thing to help the poor starving people of North Korea. In some of the latest exchanges late last week and over the weekend dealing with North Korea, we have Trump signing an executive order to allow more sanctions on companies and individuals that do business with North Korea. I'm not sure what additional authority that this sanction or that this executive order provided. I think it was more of just a big deal to show Donald Trump doing something, quote unquote, about North Korea. The United States has been sanctioning Chinese banks for quite a while for doing business or financing transactions with North Korea. And probably the most disturbing tweet I have seen Donald tweet out, and no, this wasn't about football, Trump tweeted out that Kim Jong-un is a madman. And of course, this paired with his Rocket Man statements at his UN speech is getting to the point where I'm getting more and more concerned about this North Korea thing. The concern comes because now if Trump doesn't assess Kim Jong-un as a rational actor, then I think Trump could be worried that Kim Jong-un would carry out a preemptive attack against the United States. If you look at this from the position of North Korea, carrying out a preemptive attack will cost you your really only ally in China and will take away any possible chance the Kim Jong-un administration and possibly even the entire North Korean people have of survival. It's gone if they launch a preemptive strike. And so if Donald Trump knows that, and he knows that Kim Jong-un knows that, then he could be pretty confident that North Korea isn't going to carry out a strike against the United States, South Korea, or Japan without being attacked first. Now, Trump doesn't know this, if Trump is, has the HR McMaster saying, well, I know it doesn't seem like preemptive nuclear war with North Korea is a good idea, but that Kim Jong-un, we really can't trust or know what he's doing, so I think we just gotta go ahead and do it. Trump will make that decision much earlier, and so, like I said, if this is his perception of the North Korean state, then I'm worried about Trump being on a little bit more of a hair trigger. And some good news about the North Korean situation, because we really don't get enough of it or any ever. We have South Korea, an entity in South Korea it's a government administration kind of dedicated to trying to improve relations with the North. And they voted to give an $8 million donation to humanitarian relief efforts for North Korea. I think it's the third-party organization, some big name Red Cross type group that goes around and gives aid to people. I think that one of the things they were actually doing was trying to prevent AIDS in North Korea. Right? This is good news because the North and the South Korean people really aren't enemies. The North Korean leadership is an enemy with the United States leadership, but I don't have any hostilities against anybody in North Korea. I don't even know anybody in North Korea. In fact, it may be possible, and I'm sure many Americans don't know a single North Korean, and that's just, kind of the situation today, but that doesn't mean we need to go over there and kill them all, or it doesn't matter. And so these humanitarian efforts I hopefully show the different populations, the humanity of the other side's population, because that's where all this money comes from. And so efforts like this may at least put some political pressure on the, South and North Korean administrations to ease up on some of these tensions. Mattis reiterates that the United States has military options against North Korea. Now, right before Steve Bannon quit, he made it very clear that the United States did not have any military options against North Korea, and I agree with this assessment. And was saying it long before Steve Bannon ever made that statement. And it's because of North Korea's artillery that they have pointed at about 30 million people in South Korea, including 100,000 or so Americans. That at the start of any war, North Korea could just launch a barrage of artillery fire against the South Koreans and could kill, I've seen estimates in the 2 to 3 millions of civilians as they could, realistically possibly kill. I think this case could be somewhat overstated because sometimes people say, well, they could wipe out Seoul. Not all the North Korean artillery can, hit Seoul. But they could do a significant amount of damage to an awful lot of people and very quickly. They could just rain down fire and it would be very nasty. And so Mattis really doesn't say how he bypasses this objection that Bannon had or this obvious military problem unless the United States assesses that a military solution includes the death of a couple million South Korean people. The United States had a pretty big show of force, actually 2 of them in the past week. The first one, which occurred last week, I think about Wednesday, we had the United States dropping a live fire bomb in South Korea near the demilitarized zone. So if you're in North Korea and you're constantly concerned about all these, U.S. shows of force and that one of them is going to turn out to be not a show of force, but an attack and a strike against North Korea, this time you actually had the U.S. launching a bomb. And while the bomb, I'm assuming was pretty clearly directed that it was, going to hit a live fire range in South Korea, and this wasn't dangerous, from anybody in South Korea's perspective, but, the North Koreans mistaken, they decide, this bomb's coming for North Korea and decide to start launching weapons. Once this starts, it doesn't end quickly, and this is really concerning. We had another show of force by the United States, and this one I think was an even bigger deal. We had U.S. B-1B bombers, which are the ones that carry the nuclear bombs, flanked by F-15s. The B-1Bs are, of course, stationed in Guam, and I think the F-15s are either flying off of an aircraft carrier or actually stationed in South Korea. Planes are closest to the North Korean border and North Korean air territory than U.S. planes have been, I guess, since the North Korean War. We have some North Korean threats in response. One of them is just North Korea making general threats. We're going to do things to America. The other is that they had an anti-U.S. rally, and pictures show that there was a couple 10,000 North Koreans cheering in the streets against the United States. I don't know how true all these rallies are and what the North Korean people feel. They may feel like if they don't go, they're going to get shot, so they got to go to these rallies. They may go out to the rallies in actual support of them. We have Trump making threats towards Kim Jong-un, and then the foreign minister of North Korea threatening their actual lives. I think this is the kind of thing that Kim Jong-un probably takes kind of seriously, and this might be some concern. We have some ABC polling saying that 62% of Americans don't trust Trump to deal with the North Korea situation, and this is the problem. Then we should demanding that the U.S. needs to walk back, because the one thing you can have is a buffoon being in charge of possible nuclear warfare. The worst possible scenario right now is that Trump mistakenly launches a nuclear weapon, and then who knows what happens, right? We have North Korea being a nuclear superpower itself, bordering two other nuclear superpowers, one being Russia and one being China. We have South Korea being a close ally of the United States right on the border of North Korea. We have Japan in the area. We have Guam in the area. We have tons of other U.S. interests in the area. Who knows how fast a nuclear war could spiral out of control, and what kind of poor decisions that leaders can make that would land us into terrible positions. And so if 62% of Americans don't trust Donald Trump to deal with this issue, then a lot of Americans need to start calling their congressmen and senators and saying, hey, you gotta do something to bat Trump off the ledge here, because we know he can't deal with it, and we know this could be the end of all humanity. Some updates about the London subway bombing from last week. So far, it looks like the two main suspects are an Iraqi man who came to the UK as some kind of refugee. He was orphaned and I believe arrived at the age of 15. And then we have a Syrian man being arrested. We have 7 total arrests. I'm not sure how many of these people were actually significant players in the actual bombing or had any jihadist tendencies. We had some reporting saying that it looked like that these people didn't have any actual connections to any Islamist groups and were just kind of off on their own doing things. In Syria, we have kind of the biggest news, and I guess next to North Korea, the most important, thing going on in the world right now, and that is a hot conflict going on in and around Deir ez-Zor. Deir ez-Zor is a city located somewhat in west-south central Syria. If you go Google it on the map, it's on the banks of the Euphrates River. Most of the city actually lies on the west of the Euphrates River, with some of the gas fields being on the east side. We have U.S.-backed Syrian Democratic Forces that, are mostly made of the YPG, which are the Syrian Kurdish forces, marching down from the city of Raqqa, trying to race to the city of Deir ez-Zor as quickly as possible. Early last week, we had the YPG and SDF forces saying that the Syrian Arab Army cannot cross the Euphrates River. Since we've had plenty of reports that they have already done so, it doesn't seem like they've made many significant advances on the east side of the Euphrates River if they have crossed it. I saw this morning that there was some Russian bombing near SDF positions. I'm not sure what was going on there. It looked like a tweet from the U.S. military actually suggested that the United States and Russia got on the deconfliction lines pretty quick and worked out whatever was going on. And so that's good news, but I think we're just that close to a flashpoint or hostility in Syria between Russia and the United States. Very, very scary. We, have Russia warning the United States that that Russia will retaliate against SDF positions, and I guess this includes one where there's U.S. troops. If those SDF positions fire on the Syrian Arab Army or positions where the Russians are located nearby. We have Russian troops on the ground in the area, including a Russian general who was killed by ISIS. It looks like ISIS mortar fire got this general, and so, Russia is, taking losses in Syria, and that's something that we all should remember. It's kind of only portrayed as the United States is sacrificing to get ISIS out of Syria, but Russia's working very hard towards that, and it's costing them a lot of money and troops as well. I will say kind of the bright spot on Syria is it's a little different than maybe North Korea, where it seems like the military is taking the situation seriously and we don't have Trump just going around tweeting everywhere on the situation, calling Assad a madman, things like that. In fact, we have pretty much the opposite. We have the United States really trying to say, hey, let's figure out a way to have some deconfliction lines, and, it sprung into action and work today when we had Russian planes apparently bombing close to SDF forces. Not a bigger conflict came out of that. We have the United States capturing the largest gas field, or U.S. bad forces, so YPG SDF forces capturing the largest gas field in Syria that is on the east side of the Euphrates River near Deir ez-Zor. Elsewhere in Syria, we have Israel bombing a Hezbollah and Assad position outside of Damascus. Of course, Israel has been doing this monthly or a couple times a month since the Syrian, except for, I think, one time where we had some Syrian rebel stray mortar fire go from Syria into the Israeli-claimed Golan Heights. And then the Israelis carried out an airstrike against those Syrian jihadist-linked fighters. The Israelis tend to only hit the Assad army in this fight and tend to side with the rebels, even if they have jihadist tendencies. We have U.S. forces claiming they now control 90% of Raqqa. It seems that what happened is ISIS gave up large sections of Raqqa in order to fall back and hold the easiest territory to hold. We kind of saw that when this happened in Mosul, that that part of the city was just absolutely flattened by airstrikes. So if we'll see if that happens here. There are currently 10 to 25,000 civilians still in ISIS-held areas. More narrow estimates put the number closer to 20,000. We have the United States killing 1,000 civilians in Raqqa since June and 433 in August. A total of 2,617 civilians have been killed by the United States in Syria since the war against ISIS started. I guess I'd just like to remind you that while I'm quoting all these civilian net death numbers, these are the numbers of civilians that are documented to have been killed. So if there's any ambiguity where maybe it was the United States, maybe it was Russia, those aren't counted here. If it was maybe a U.S. airstrike, maybe not, then it's not counted here. But if there's a U.S. airstrike on that day and then somebody dies in that place and that person can be confirmed to be not a terrorist, then that is how they count it. We also have the U.S. closing a military outpost in southern Syria. This was the outpost outside of Al-Tamf. And the article I read said this will actually lead to quite a large concession in territory to the Syrian Arab Army. We have 9 Yemeni civilians being killed in a Saudi airstrike, and then this was in northern Yemen, Houthi territory. We then had the Houthis apparently responding by launching a ballistic missile into Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia reports they shot that missile down. At the UN, we have the president of Yemen, who only really controls southern Yemen and who doesn't have much of an army but relies on Saudi Arabia's army, saying that the only solution in Yemen is a military solution, and basically said that we need Saudi Arabia to come in to take out the Saleh government, the people in the north, the Houthis, and trying to unite the country that way. After 4 months of fighting, we now have the Islamic State in the Philippines, the city of Marari, only holding about 10 square blocks there. They estimate about 60 fighters remain, and this has been a long fight. One of the reasons apparently the fight has been so long, and that is the Philippines government elected not to use a fighting force made out of Muslim fighters. A lot of Muslim advocates in the Philippines felt that using the Muslim fighters would have made the civilian population more sympathetic towards the Philippines government military force, but Philippines government decided to, I guess, use a different fighting force, and that has, caused a lot of problems and prolonged the fight. 4 months I felt this city in the Philippines. Incredible. One of the other things that was the reason that the ISIS has been able to hold out so long there, and that is because they apparently have better weaponry coming from the Middle East, night vision goggles, better scopes, better guns. Reporting from Bangladesh says that the number of Rohingya refugees reaching Bangladesh from Myanmar has almost stopped in the past couple of days. I've read reports from the Myanmar government that suggested that any of the clearing operations ceased on September 5th, so maybe this will make sense. That statement may not be far from the truth. It looks like we have about 400,000 of these people, which would be 40-ish% of the estimated Rohingya in Myanmar fleeing to Bangladesh. In Afghanistan, we have the Taliban carrying out a suicide bombing against a NATO convoy. no NATO troops were injured or killed during the attack of 3 civilians war, and just, the ongoing mess and travesty of Afghanistan, which I will be talking about a lot next week in my interview with Scott Horton. So if anybody has any questions they would like me to ask Scott, please check out the Facebook group Foreign Policy Focus. The pin post there is about anybody who has any questions. Let me know what they are, and I can, ask the ones that make sense to be asked. Alright, that'll wrap up my show for today. I hope everybody enjoyed the show. Let me know what you like about the show. If there's anything else you want me to weigh in on. I decided not to talk about the sitting, standing, kneeling, or whatever the hell's going on in the NFL these days, just because I didn't think it was that related to foreign policy, although I'm sure I could tie it in if somebody really wanted to hear some things on that. And there, there's a whole bunch of other stuff, different areas of the world. If you think I'm under focusing on an area or talking too much about Syria, whatever you think's important, give me feedback. Let me know what I can do to make the show better. You find the show at foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com, thelibertarianinstitute.org, or at Kyle's Files Facebook page. I'm on Twitter at KYAAALE, and the personal website is kylesfilesblog.com. Do news roundup every day. You find it at kylesfilesblog.com or thelibertarianinstitute.org. Really is like the kind of almost the show notes for the podcast. I mean, I really document and link to all the articles that you need to read if you want to stay up to date on foreign policy. I try to give, just a little tagline or summary of the article so if, this is the kind of thing you want to read. So, hope you enjoy it. Thanks, everyone.